Okay, time flies and we have to cover a lot of material, so I wanted to spend some time showing how to use the external Eclipse debugger with AnyLogic. I think it's really important to have recourse to a debugger like this from time to time. It's really important to have the opportunity to dig into what's going on under the covers in your model when you need it. Again, most cases I rely on print statements, and you do great. Print statements and thinking are the main thing. But having that debugger will be helpful from time to time. So the debugger here, as I alluded to a week or two ago, is based on Eclipse. This editor we talked about a couple times ago, that's one of the most popular software development tools around. And we talked about Eclipse in what context? Does anyone remember? When did we talk about Eclipse? When did I show an example of Eclipse use? I was talking about what sort of process? It was the process of, begins with a P, ends with a G, with an F in the middle. Does anyone play Hangman anymore? There's an O, N, L. Profiling. Yes, it was profiling. Good. Okay, well, gets the.
I knew we go all the way.
What's that?
I knew we go all the way.
Yeah. He wanted to get the suspense going for the hanged man. Yeah, so it's profiling. So we talked about Eclipse for profiling. And could have looked up here and you would have gotten a good hint. So it provides a lot of tools, visualization tools, version controls of models, and subversion repositories, for example. These are all good things. We're going to talk today about the debugger. Okay? So Eclipse can be used to debug AnyLogic models at the Java source code level. What I mean by that is you can look at the detailed code of what is going on in the model and what is taking time. Okay? So there's a one-time step that's needed to enable this for AnyLogic, for a project in AnyLogic within Eclipse. There's a one-time step for setting it up, and I have some slides in that. For the sake of time, I'm gonna not go into those slides in detail. But I would welcome if anyone here wants to set up Eclipse with this. I'd be glad to work with them to do this. Basically, in AnyLogic, you have to set some properties associated with so-called Java virtual machine, and it's associated with the simulation that you want to run. And then Eclipse, you have to create what's called debugging configuration that knows how to connect to AnyLogic. And it's, yes, and I'll show you how you do this. Okay. And so there's a one-time setup that requires, about 5 to 10 minutes to go through. And then every time you want to debug, you go to Eclipse. Actually, this is a bit simplified. So you start up AnyLogic model. You go to Eclipse. You tell it to connect to the AnyLogic model, and then you interrupt it. And you can set breakpoints and get it to stop where you want it to stop, so you can spy on it. Okay. We're going to look at how this is done. So one-time setup in AnyLogic involves putting a kind of a piece of information under the Java virtual machine arguments, and you can see also there's some steps to set it up in Eclipse. Critically, and this is important, for it to know about your Java source files, you could set breakpoints, and so it knows about names of variables, etc. You need to point it. You need to set up a so-called debug configuration that can connect to AnyLogic. And you need to tell it where your files are, the Java files for your project. And that involves pointing it to the appropriate folders. So the appropriate folder for this version of AnyLogic, it's actually changed from previous versions. If you have a users folder, there's a thing called .AnyLogic University, and within that there's a thing called workspace, and then you'll look for your project. source code location. So in other words, that's where it should look for the Java files. Now, once you set it up, you could set breakpoints, see variables, and catch exceptions, etc., and spy on what's going on there. So what I'm going to suggest is that we walk through this, okay? So you can see how this is done. And with your pardon, I'm going to take the pilot seat now, and we'll go over to AnyLogic and Eclipse, and we'll see how this is done. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do after having gone through this process of setting up AnyLogic to connect on a one-time basis, this whole process that we went through here, I'll show you what that looks like once set up. But basically, in AnyLogic, whoa, okay, hey, get out of here. I was running this earlier, and boom, kill this thing. Boom, dead. Okay, so folks, over here, you'll notice there's a thing called debugging session, okay? That's a type of experiment called debugging session. The reason I have a separate experiment is, first of all, I might want to have debugging experiments that have very particular parameter values. They're not your run-of-the-mill parameter values. They're very specific ones that reproduce the error easily or whatever. Extreme cases, for example, are a good way to do this. Now, if I go to advanced, what you'll actually see is that there's something that says Java machine arguments. And this is this horrible long string to it. See where it says address equals this, da-da-da-da-da. And it's a horrible thing, and you have to implement it once. Now, after that, I have this debugging session experiment set up, so I can run this thing. And from an AnyLogic perspective, it's sort of another any other type of model, except that you'll notice it says listening for transport DT socket at address. So it's waiting there, and it's listening. Listening for the hoofbeats on the ground of Eclipse, okay? Now, if Eclipse doesn't interact with it, it'll run just fine. Watch this. It stands before us running. See that? In all its Christmas-like glory. So here it's running, and that's without any interaction from Eclipse. But I'm going to run this with interaction for Eclipse. So I'm going to kill that particular version. I'm going to go back and I'm going to run it again. And I'm going to get it ready to be connected to Eclipse, okay? So it's all set. It's ready for connection from Eclipse. It's standing there, stands before us, ready to serve. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to Eclipse. Now, I previously had set up Eclipse into the appropriate format. I'm going to go back to the normal so-called perspective in Eclipse, which is called the Java perspective, okay? This is the sort of perspective that would be most typical when you come in. And I'm going to close these windows just because you don't need to. Do I want to? No, I don't want to see that. Okay, just to clean things up. Okay, I'm going to go over to the debug perspective. It actually shows it next to here, but I'm going to click it here. Debug perspective basically gives me easy access to functionality relevant for debugging. This comes with AnyLogic, by the way. You don't have to download anything. Sorry, with Eclipse. You don't have to download anything else. I think it's part of the standard thing with Eclipse, as I recall. Okay, so here we are in Eclipse. Now you'll notice there's a kind of bug up here, and it actually says debug AnyLogic application, but there's a whole set of so-called debugging configurations. And if I click here, I previously set one up using exactly the things that I've described here about adding my source code folders, and I did the setup configuration, okay? I've done that already, but I'll show you the evidence that I've done that here. Once I've done that, I have a thing called AnyLogic application that knows how to connect, and there's a pointer to my source code, which is located here for my Eclipse debugging example that I'm running, okay? So once I have that, then I'm in good shape, and I can actually say, okay, I want to debug an AnyLogic application. So it's going off to this port 8321, at which AnyLogic is listening. That's the same port you'll recall where AnyLogic says, I'm waiting for a connection. And actually, it's connected. So you'll see here a list of so-called threads. These threads are different things that are running in parallel within the model. Now, right now, there's not a lot of int going on in the model. The model stands before us ready to serve. And so we want to start it now, okay? So before we start it, though, I think what we'll do is we'll set a breakpoint, okay? So now that we've connected, we're going to go and open up the Java file, okay? So I'm going to open up a Java file. And I'm opening up the Java file that I normally edit in AnyLogic. So over here in AnyLogic, you remember I could do this thing. I showed it to you the past few times. You could say open with Java. Do you remember that? So this particular thing exists somewhere on your disk. And in fact, I can't remember in this. Here's, excuse me. Hey, come on back to person.java. Hey, you stop bothering me with that. Okay, open with Java editor. Boom. Okay, here we go. Here we go. And if I went and I looked person.java, I guess it doesn't tell me directly where it is, but I could track it down through other things. Here's this person.java, and this is some Java code, okay? And if we looked in here, there was actually a thing called perform birth. You remember that? Remember perform birth? And here's a call to it, but I want actually to go to the perform birth action. And there it is. Perform birth, okay? This is this method which we wrote. Remember that? And this calls these methods with very long names, establish offspring connections based on mother's connections. Okay, so this is over in AnyLogic. Well, it turns out that that file's on disk. And we can go get it from the appropriate folder. If we just know where to look in our Eclipse workspace, we can go find it. And there's a thing called person.java. And here it is. There's that same file. That's where AnyLogic's looking for it. That's where we can look for it. So now I'm going to go find perform birth. Okay? And there's the call to it, and here it is. There it stands before me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a breakpoint for this. Okay? What is a breakpoint? A breakpoint is a point where if the execution of the model in AnyLogic reaches that point, it will stop. But it will not stop and just give up and die. It will stop and allow me to poke around and see what's going on. It will allow me to look at what's the value of the different variables, to dig down into it, to change variable values. It could allow me to perform little experiments to see if it works, you know, with this tweak. So I'm going to set a breakpoint. How do I set a breakpoint? Well, I double-click over here. And if you go and you look at breakpoints here, what you'll see is that when I double-click there, it'll actually set a breakpoint. Let me get rid of that right now. That means it's disabled. But if I double-click here, I could say toggle breakpoint. I was right-clicking, and it will then have a breakpoint on. And let's see. Come on. Oh, I guess I got rid of it because it was already there. Toggle breakpoint. Okay. Here it is. Perform birth. Okay. It's this critical area over here that's a bit darker that you have to click on. Okay. And alternatively, I could click down here, so it breaks when it's only down at this point. I don't have to do it at the beginning of the method. I could do it down here. So in fact, I'm going to get rid of this breakpoint. Notice to see the existence of that breakpoint, you have to look up at this breakpoints window. It doesn't actually show a marker. But I'm going to set a breakpoint right here. Toggle breakpoint, okay? And you can see there's a little check mark next to this. So it says line 528 of person, and that's that line. See, it says line 528, okay? So what this is saying is that if this model runs, it's going to stop the very first time you get to this point, okay? It's going to actually stop and invoke this debugger. It's going to say, hey, debugger, wake up, because I've reached that point. Now, why that's useful, we'll see in a minute, but that's what it's going to do. By setting this breakpoint, it's going to stop there, okay? Okay, so that's all well and good, but we could wait now until the cows come home, and it's not going to hit that breakpoint. Why do I say that? If I just walked away from this room and left you to muse, yeah, okay, so why is it not going to reach there right now? Because I actually haven't started the model. Remember, I just got it to this place. I just got it to the place. I connected, and I went and I sent my breakpoint. I haven't actually started the model yet for this round. I'm going to actually now start the model. Okay? Okay, now I'm starting the model, and it's starting to run. Now, what we'd expect to happen is, ba-boom! Now it reached that point. Did you see that? Okay, so let us go and kill this model. Boom, dead. And I'm going to restart it. Okay. We're going to go through that little exercise again. This time I'll sort of bring that to the foreground. Okay. So I went there. The other thing I had to do was connect to it. So I needed to go. I need to say, hey, go look there. Go connect to him, and he connects. Okay. And I've already set this breakpoint. It remembered that, so I don't have to go reset that set it again. Now I go back to this, and this time take a look what's here. In fact, I'm going to close this. You'll see I'm going to close these things. It says it's changed. Yeah, sure. I'll just do that. Okay. So there's still the breakpoint there. Watch this. I'm going to start running this now, okay? Notice the kind of state of things up here also. Watch this. Those things are going to change. You notice there's something new that sort of got added there. And then you notice it went boom. And then this came into being here. So what happened is that it stopped. It created this little window where it shows a green line. That green line shows where it's about to execute. So it just reached this point and hit this breakpoint and has stopped there. You notice there's a thing for it to continue up here, this little button up here. But you'll notice it has shown me some information here. Does anyone recognize this? Does anyone recognize what this is? You've seen it before, and I cited this lecture as one of the foremost motivations for introducing this notion. It's a call stack. This is the call stack. So here, execute action of called perform birth. Okay. So this is saying perform birth is currently the topmost thing. So we're in perform birth, and indeed we are. And we're at this point in perform birth. We're just at the mother, their identity, and the offspring, their identity. And notice by hovering over this, ladies and gentlemen, that it actually can give information on these variables. It can allow me to sort of drill down here. For example, this is an individual who has an ethnicity associated with them. They're South Asian. Okay, that's the one that's giving birth first, is a South Asian person. There's lots of information here. I don't really know in detail what it is, but their color, for example, well, we could know something about its certain properties of it. We know they're a South Asian person. We could look at their name, probably. Person name, I think, was the name of it. Oops, whoa. Well, it's actually easier to do it up through this. So here we have a way of sort of digging down. Here's the mother's characteristics here, and we could drill down into it. So we could see their initial age was 29. They were not initially infected. The pregnancy status, we can actually look what their state chart characteristics are. They have a certain sex, which here is female, which is good because if they're giving birth, that's desirable. And then they have some offspring. The offspring here, the variable. So in short, these two variables are both visible up here, as is the this variable, which actually corresponds to the mother. So I can go and poke around in this information here. In principle, I could even change it. I could even set the offspring to be the mother or something like that. That would yield undesirable consequences, I think. Another thing that can be done is I can single step. So if I'm here, ladies and gentlemen, you'll know, let's go over to the AnyLogic console here. Here's the AnyLogic consoles. Note its current status. The last line here is so-and-so has died, right? I'm going to single step this. So you see up here, it says there's a thing step over, step into. Those have to do with stepping the model forward. Okay? So the step over is going to execute this next line. So it just advanced. Okay? And now, based on that trace-ln, it's printed out this thing. Okay? So in short, this has allowed me to kind of break in and see what's going on. It actually allowed me to stop here. And similarly, I could either go over this or into this. So here's a call. This is a call to establish offspring connections based on mother's connections. I can actually step into this using this button. And it will step into this and start executing that method. Okay? And I can actually trace through it, trace through the logic as to what's going on. Okay, who's the next person, who's being connected to who. And similarly here, I could go in and see, okay, who's the offspring that's being connected to the people. And then if I go a step further here, okay, there's this person P to whom they're being connected. Who is that? Well, we could go look here and try to look for the identifying characteristics of this person. In short, there's the potential for sort of poking around and looking at information and seeing if it makes sense. I can also step return, so I'll step out of the current method. Alternatively, I can step over the current method and just execute it directly. So this is a case where I broke into the model at a certain point. Now, I'm going to show you something else, though, where we're going to do something that's of relevance to Jerome's, to an issue Jerome is encountering right now. Okay? So watch this. I've just used this to trace through perform birth. Okay? And as you can see, there's a lot of information there, but generally you can make out some pieces of information that are relevant. And there's going to be a lot that's somewhat mysterious. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create an infinite loop. Okay? This sounds undesirable, but my point is I'm going to see how I can diagnose what's going on where if the model just stops. And specifically, I am going to create an infinite loop and maybe I'll do it an offspring location based on mother's connection. Okay? I'm going to create a loop which never ends. Okay, I'm just going to do while true, I could even just do it empty, so it'll loop. But to give it a bit of texture, I'm going to have a variable here, and all this is going to do is increment the variable. Okay, this code will never stop. So as soon as this is hit, it's just going to sit there forever, unless we intervene in the form of a debugger. Okay, so here I've introduced a kind of pseudo bug, which I want to track down. What is it that's stopping the model? Okay, so I've introduced this code. Remind me to remove this before the session is over, right? And in fact, I'll probably, good practice is to put in something saying, remove this after demonstration or something like that, so I could search for that. I have a convention of signaling to myself in that way. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to build this model. Okay, just make sure, yep, it's all fine and good. And I'm going to start up a debugging. Well, first of all, let's run this model. Okay. By the way, just looking here, this version doesn't actually have their name, and that's why we didn't see a name in their properties. That obviously would be a good thing to have, this version of the model. Okay, so I'm going to run this thing, and actually I don't need to run debugging session. I can run any session, but that one's just as good as any other. Now, if I run this model now, what do you think will happen? Okay, the first birth, now it will stop, right? So some information printed out, and it said a baby's been born, but then what's going on now? Exactly.